most fearless personalities walks into the lion's den of daytime television and completely dismantles one of its most outspoken hosts. Today, we're diving into the moment Howard Stern stepped onto The View and delivered a masterclass in how to handle someone who thought they could intimidate him. Joy Behar learned the hard way that when you come for the king of shock radio, you better not miss. This is a story about power, ego, and what happens when someone finally calls out the behavior that viewers have been complaining about for years. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe how this unfolds. The tension was palpable from the moment Howard Stern walked onto the View set. The studio audience erupted in applause, but there was something different in the air. Joy Behar sat at the iconic table with her arms crossed, already wearing that expression that regular viewers knew meant trouble was brewing. She had been vocal about her disdain for Howard's brand of entertainment for years, calling it degrading and inappropriate on multiple occasions during the show. Well, Joy said, as Howard settled into the guest chair, her voice dripping with condescension. Look who decided to grace us with his presence. Howard Stern, the man who built an empire on shocking people and pushing boundaries. Tell me, Howard, do you ever feel responsible for lowering the standards of American media? The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Whoopi tried to interject with a more diplomatic greeting. But Joy wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Howard with the kind of intensity that made it clear she wasn't interested in a friendly chat. Howard, completely unfazed, smiled that trademark grin that had gotten him through decades of controversy. You know, Joy, that's interesting coming from someone who's made a career out of interrupting her co-hosts and talking over guests. Should I be taking notes on your approach to raising standards? The audience let out a collective gasp. Joy's face immediately flushed red, and you could see her jaw clench. She wasn't used to guests who could match her energy, let alone turn it back on her. Excuse me? Joy snapped, her voice rising an octave. I've been in this business longer than you've been relevant, Howard. I don't need some shock jock telling me how to conduct myself. Relevant? Howard chuckled, leaning back in his chair with complete confidence. Joy, my show reaches millions of people every single day. When was the last time anyone under 40 actively chose to watch The View? I'm just curious about your definition of relevance. The studio fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop as Joy's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words that wouldn't come. The other hosts looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. This wasn't going according to Joy's usual script, where she dominated the conversation and left guests scrambling to defend themselves. That's completely inappropriate, Joy stammered, clearly thrown off by Howard's direct approach. You can't just come on our show and insult our ratings, but you can come for my entire career and question my integrity? Howard shot back smoothly. See, this is what I find fascinating about people like you. Joy. You can dish it out all day long, but the moment someone serves it back to you with the same energy, suddenly it's inappropriate. That's not how this works. Joy turned to her co-hosts for support, but they were all avoiding eye contact. Sunny looked like she was studying her notes intensely, while Sarah was suddenly very interested in her coffee cup. Whoopi finally tried to step in. Okay, let's maybe take this down a notch and talk about Howard's new book, Whoopi suggested diplomatically. But Joy wasn't done. Her pride had been wounded, and she was doubling down. No. Whoopi, I want to address this. Howard, you've spent decades objectifying women, making crude jokes, and contributing to a culture that degrades people for entertainment. And now you're sitting here acting like you're some kind of victim because I called you out on it? Howard's expression didn't change, but there was a shift in his posture. He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Joy, let me ask you something. How many times have you interrupted your female co-hosts mid-sentence this week alone? How many times have you dismissed their opinions or talked over them when they were trying to make a point? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're describing your own behavior. The camera caught Joy's face perfectly at that moment, and the expression was priceless. Her eyes widened as if she couldn't believe someone had just said that to her on national television. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. That's not the same thing at all, Joy sputtered, her usual quick wit completely abandoning her. Isn't it though? Howard pressed on, his voice calm but cutting. You've built your career on being the person who says what others won't say, right? The tough questioner who doesn't let people off easy. So, why is it different when someone does the same thing to you? Why do the rules change when you're on the receiving end? Joy looked around the table again, clearly hoping one of her co-hosts would jump in and save her. But they all seemed to be watching this unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. She had painted herself into a corner, and Howard was just getting started. I think there's a difference between asking tough questions and being deliberately provocative for shock value, Joy said, trying to regain her composure. Oh, absolutely, Howard agreed with a nod. The difference is that I'm honest about what I'm doing. I've never pretended to be anything other than what I am. But you sit at this table every day acting like you're some kind of moral authority while you bully your co-hosts and talk down to guests who don't share your worldview. At least I own my behavior. The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Joy's hands were visibly shaking as she reached for her water glass, and you could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to respond to someone who wasn't intimidated by her usual tactics. Joy set her water glass down with a little too much force, the sound echoing through the silent studio. Her face had gone from red to a deeper shade of crimson, and you could see her trying to collect herself. But Howard wasn't giving her any breathing room. You know what I find really interesting, Joy? Howard continued, his tone conversational but with an edge that cut right through her defenses. You talk about degrading people for entertainment, but wasn't it just last week that you spent an entire segment mocking that young actress's outfit choice? What was it you called her? A fashion disaster who needed an intervention. Joy's mouth opened, but no words came out. The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances as Howard pressed on. And the week before that, didn't you spend 10 minutes making jokes about that politician's weight? Really detailed, personal attacks about his appearance? But somehow that's different from what I do because you're doing it in the name of political commentary? That's not the same thing, Joy finally managed, her voice noticeably strained. When we critique public figures, it's about holding them accountable. Accountable for what exactly? Their clothing choices? Their body weight? Their personal appearance? Howard leaned back in his chair with that knowing smile. Come on, Joy. Even you don't believe that. You do it because it gets laughs and keeps people watching. Which, by the way, is fine. Just be honest about it instead of pretending you're on some moral high ground. Sarah tried to jump in at this point, clearly sensing that Joy was drowning. Howard, I think what Joy is trying to say is that there's a difference between commentary and exploitation. Howard turned his attention to Sarah with a polite smile. Sarah, I appreciate you trying to help your colleague out, but I'm pretty sure Joy can speak for herself. Unless, of course, she's suddenly lost the ability to interrupt people and dominate conversations. The shade was so perfectly delivered that even some audience members couldn't suppress their reactions. You could hear a few scattered chuckles, which only made Joy's face redden further. I don't dominate conversations, Joy said through gritted teeth. I facilitate discussion. Is that what we're calling it? Howard raised an eyebrow. Joy, I've been watching clips of this show for years, and I can count on one hand the number of times you've let a guest finish a complete thought without cutting them off. You've interrupted me 17 times in the last 5 minutes alone. That's not true, Joy protested. Would you like me to have the producers count it back? Howard offered casually. I'm sure they've got the footage. Or better yet, let's test it right now. Why don't you let me speak for 60 seconds without saying a word? Just 60 seconds. Joy's eyes darted around the table again. She was trapped, and she knew it. If she interrupted him, she'd prove his point. If she didn't, she'd look weak and controlled. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Howard was winning decisively. "Fine," Joy said curtly, crossing her arms. "Go ahead." Howard smiled and checked his watch. "Perfect. Starting now." You know, Joy, what's fascinating about this whole interaction is that it perfectly illustrates everything that's wrong with the current state of media. We have people like you who have convinced themselves that their personal opinions are somehow more valid than everyone else's, simply because they have a platform. You sit at this table every day and lecture America about tolerance and respect, but you show neither to the people sitting right next to you. You claim to be a champion for women's voices, but you consistently talk over and dismiss the women on your own panel. Sunny over there has some incredibly insightful things to say about legal issues, but how many times have you cut her off when she's trying to explain complex legal concepts? Sarah brings a completely different generational perspective to political discussions, but you treat her like she's naive whenever she disagrees with your worldview. And Whoopi, who has more life experience and wisdom than probably everyone in this studio combined, you argue with her like she's some kind of amateur. The hypocrisy is staggering. Throughout his entire 60-second monologue, you could see Joy physically struggling to stay quiet. Her mouth kept opening as if she was going to speak, then snapping shut. Her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white, and she was practically bouncing in her seat with the effort of keeping quiet. When Howard finished and checked his watch again, he looked up at Joy with mock surprise. "Would you look at that? You actually made it the full minute." Joy exploded. "How dare you sit there and psychoanalyze me and my relationships with my co-hosts? You don't know anything about what goes on behind the scenes or how we support each other." "You're absolutely right, Joy. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes," Howard replied smoothly. "I only know what I see on camera, which is you consistently bulldozing through conversations and treating your co-hosts like props in your one-woman show. But hey, if that's different from how you really are, off camera, maybe the problem is that you're just not very good at hiding your true personality when the cameras are rolling." The other hosts were now openly staring at this exchange like it was a car accident they couldn't look away from. Whoopi kept glancing at the producers off camera, probably hoping someone would call for a commercial break. But this was live television, at its most unpredictable. "You know what, Howard?" Joy's voice was shaking now. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. "I've been doing television for decades. I've interviewed presidents, celebrities, world leaders, and I've never had anyone speak to me this way. And there's the problem right there," Howard said, his voice taking on an almost sympathetic tone that somehow made the words hit even harder. "No one has ever challenged you like this because they were all too polite, too professional, or too afraid of the backlash. They let you get away with behavior that would get anyone else called a bully because you've convinced everyone that your rudeness is just passion for the issues. But I'm not running for office. I don't need your endorsement. And I'm not trying to get invited back to your show. So I can tell you exactly what everyone else has been thinking but was too nice to say." Joy was visibly shaking now. "This is completely unprofessional. Whoopi, are we going to let him continue attacking me on our own show?" Whoopi finally spoke up, but not in the way Joy was expecting. "Joy, he's responding to questions you asked him. You opened this door when you decided to attack his character and his career. He's just defending himself." The look of betrayal on Joy's face was unmistakable. She had clearly expected her co-hosts to rally around her. But instead, they were watching Howard dismantle her piece by piece with what seemed like fascination rather than concern. "Defending himself?" Joy's voice cracked slightly. "He's been attacking me personally for the last 10 minutes. Have I, though?" Howard tilted his head thoughtfully. "Or have I just been pointing out patterns in your behavior that are visible to anyone who watches this show regularly? There's a difference between personal attacks and professional observations. You attacked my character and questioned my integrity based on your personal feelings about my content. I'm simply commenting on your professional behavior based on what I can observe. If you don't like what I'm saying, maybe the issue isn't with my observations. The studio atmosphere had shifted completely. What started as Joy's attempt to embarrass Howard had turned into a masterclass in how quickly tables can turn when someone refuses to be intimidated. Joy looked around the table one more time, desperately searching for an ally, but found none. Her co-hosts were watching this unfold with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. You know what, Howard? Joy's voice had taken on a different quality now, sharper and more desperate. Maybe the problem is that you're just another entitled man who can't handle being challenged by a strong woman? Howard's eyebrows shot up, and for the first time since he'd sat down, he looked genuinely surprised. Oh, wow. There it is. The gender card. I was wondering when that was going to come out. It's not a card. It's reality. Joy shot back, leaning forward aggressively. You can't stand the fact that a woman is calling you out on your problematic behavior, so you're trying to tear me down. Joy, Howard said, shaking his head with what looked like genuine disappointment. Do you really want to go down this road? Because if we're talking about how I treat women, we're going to have to talk about how you treat the women sitting at this very table. Joy's face went pale. She knew she had made a tactical error, but there was no taking it back now. Let's talk about strong women, shall we? Howard continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone who was about to deliver a knockout punch. Sunny graduated from law school, worked as a prosecutor, and has an encyclopedic knowledge of the legal system. But how many times have you talked over her when she's trying to explain legal concepts that you clearly don't understand? Sarah represents an entire generation of women who are trying to navigate politics and social issues in a completely different landscape than the one you grew up in, but you dismiss her perspectives as naive whenever they don't align with yours. And Whoopi, who has achieved more in entertainment and activism than most people could dream of, you argue with her like she's some kind of amateur who doesn't know what she's talking about. Each word was hitting its target with surgical precision. You could see Joy's face cycling through different emotions: anger, frustration, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like panic. That's not how I treat them, Joy protested weakly. Really? Howard turned to address the other hosts directly. Ladies, honest question. In the years you've been working with Joy, how many times has she interrupted you mid-sentence, dismissed your opinions, or talked over you when you were trying to make a point? The silence was deafening. Sunny and Sarah exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable being put on the spot, but you could see the truth in their expressions. Whoopi looked like she was weighing whether to throw Joy a lifeline or let her drown. See, this is what I mean about you playing the gender card, Howard said, turning back to Joy. You hide behind feminism when it's convenient, but you don't actually practice what you preach. You're not supporting women's voices. You're drowning them out with your own. Joy was completely rattled now. Her usual quick comebacks had abandoned her, and she was grasping for anything that might help her regain control of the situation. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who has made millions exploiting women. And there's another deflection, Howard said calmly. Instead of addressing the specific behaviors I'm pointing out, you're trying to shift the focus back to me. But here's the thing. Joy, my audience chooses to listen to my show. Your co-hosts don't have a choice but to work with you every single day. Which one of us is really exploiting women? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. You could see Joy processing the implications, and the realization that she had completely lost control of this interview was written all over her face. I think we should move on to another topic, Joy said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh, now you want to change the subject? Howard laughed, but there was no cruelty in it. Just genuine amusement. 5 minutes ago you were ready to psychoanalyze my entire career and question my moral character. But now that someone is holding up a mirror to your own behavior, suddenly, we need to talk about something else? In 7, Joy looked to the show's producers off camera, clearly hoping someone would rescue her. But this was live television, and the ratings were probably going through the roof. No producer in their right mind would cut away from this kind of television gold. Howard. Whoopi finally intervened, but her tone wasn't defensive of Joy. I think you've made your point. Have I, though? Howard turned to Whoopi with genuine curiosity. Because it seems to me like Joy started this conversation with a very specific agenda. She wanted to embarrass me, question my integrity, and position herself as some kind of moral superior. But when someone applies the same level of scrutiny to her behavior, suddenly, it's gone too far. Joy tried one last desperate attempt to regain some dignity. I was asking legitimate questions about the impact of your content on society. No, Joy, you weren't, Howard said firmly. You were trying to humiliate me on national television because you disagree with my brand of entertainment. There's a difference between asking tough questions and launching personal attacks. And the irony is that you've spent the last 15 minutes proving every stereotype about yourself that your critics have been pointing out for years. The final blow was delivered with such matter-of-fact precision that it took a moment for Joy to fully process what had just happened. When she did, the look on her face was one of complete and utter defeat. I think, Joy said slowly, clearly struggling to maintain what little composure she had left, that our audience can make their own judgments about both of our approaches to media. Absolutely they can, Howard agreed with a smile. And based on the ratings and audience engagement, I think they already have. The commercial break couldn't come fast enough. As the cameras pulled back, you could see Joy slumped in her chair, looking like someone who had just gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight champion. Howard, meanwhile, looked as relaxed and comfortable as he had when he first walked onto the set. What had started as Joy's attempt to expose Howard Stern as some kind of media villain had turned into a public dissection of her own professional behavior. She had picked a fight with someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of verbal combat, and the results were exactly what you might expect. Howard had taken everything she threw at him and turned it back on her with surgical precision, leaving her completely exposed and defenseless. The other hosts sat in stunned silence, probably processing what they had just witnessed. In less than 20 minutes, Howard had managed to articulate criticisms of Joy's behavior that viewers had been thinking for years but had never heard expressed so directly or effectively. As the show went to commercial, one thing was crystal clear. Joy Behar had learned the hard way that when you come for someone who has made a career out of not backing down, you better be prepared for the consequences. Howard Stern had just delivered a masterclass in how to turn the tables on someone who thought they held all the cards. That's the story of how one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts met her match in spectacular fashion. What do you think? Did Joy Behar get what she deserved? Or did Howard Stern go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments.